Hey there, cold open. Just wanted to tell you that in our intro, we talk about the future of telehealth, but we started with the conversation about COVID 19. And quite frankly, that conversation was so interesting, we just kept it going. So we're not talking about future of telehealth on this episode, but that will be a future episode. So look out for that coming soon. But let's get into the episode right now. Thanks. Hi, guys. Welcome to 2020's TV. Today, we have a real life doctor, Dr. Shukla, with us. And we're going to sort of probe him for an update on COVID 19. And probably more to our mission, we're going to talk about telehealth, where we are today, and where telehealth will be in the next 2, 5, 10 years. So I'm expecting it to be a very interesting conversation, and I want to welcome Nitin, and obviously want to welcome Dr. Gunjan Shukla. Thank you so much for being here, and we're looking to have a very exciting conversation. Nitin, what do you think?
Well, I'm really looking forward to it and increasing some gray cells in the process. Looking forward to learn, understand, and hopefully figure out what can we do and what should we do and what's in store for us in the near and somewhat longer term future. So, Dr. Shukla, please go ahead, educate us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let me first introduce Dr. Shukla. He's a cardiologist. He essentially calls himself to be an electrician of the heart, which is a pretty fantastic title. But being a cardiologist, I think he understands the anatomy of COVID very intricately, and COVID affects your lungs, and obviously that has impact throughout your body. So where do you think we are with COVID-19?
So it is interesting. You have asked me that the heart is right next to the lung, and so when the lung is affected, the heart is always affected with the COVID-19, and we are in an unprecedented time right now that we haven't seen this kind of infection in the last century. So, which is pretty significant. The infectiousness of this disease called COVID-19, which is a corona family virus, which is a very infectious disease, and it was first diagnosed in China approximately in December. And after that, because of the relations with the China and America, slowly it trickled over to Europe and ultimately to America. And we have first reported case of COVID-19 approximately in February. And since February, the disease is rapidly um, spreading in USA. So if you can consider, our first death was reported in February, and in current day, we are reporting the highest death in the world.
Right,
So within a matter of a few months, we have seen unprecedented death with this
right.
disease. And so just to give you an example how it is important and how it has dismantled every part of our life, we are forced to change our regular routine. We are forced to change our economy. We are forced to change our gatherings. And anything fundamentally we do, we are forced to change by this disease. Um,
Mm.
Now, where it is going, it is very interesting questions because this is a, as we say, it is a novel coronavirus. So it's a new infection. And because it is so new that doctors actually don't know a lot about it. So there is no vaccine, there is no treatment so far. Everything is under investigation. And that is why we have a significant amount of death. And then most of the people are on the life support right now as well. Where it is going, that will determine by first of all that how effectively we can control this virus. Now we have implemented one of the option, which is decrease the spread of the virus by social distancing, and that is one of the way you can decrease the spread of the virus So wearing a mask, washing your hands very frequently, keeping a social distance 6 feet apart or more, and giving example of routine hygiene. When you sneeze or cough, then cover your mouth. All of these things are very, very effective in terms of infective agent. So that's the first thing we implemented. After that, if you get the virus and if you get very sick, the outlook is very grim for the patients, because once they get admitted, as you all know, that it attacks the lung first. So you get shortness of breath, and basically you have to get admitted if your oxygen level drops. And once that happens, up to a certain extent, you can increase your oxygen by giving the outside oxygen. If that is not sufficient, then they are get intubated on a ventilator. And after they get ventilated, the chances of death is very high, approximately 70 to 80%. So
Well,
very few people who gets ventilated actually can make it outside. So where it is going, it is actually getting better. So some of the measures are working, what we implemented by social distancing and everything. So actual cases or new admissions of this virus in the hospitals, which we are New York and New Jersey are the highest affected area. And so actual new admissions are decreasing.
right.
However, you must have seen on the television the death rate has not decreased yet. Death is still increasing. So the good thing is that the new infections are decreasing, so we would have a little breather in the few months to work more diligently on the vaccine or antiviral agents or medications for this
So
virus.
I just want to make one thing clear. You're in New Jersey, just outside New York City, just outside Manhattan. So you're essentially on the front lines of this disease. So thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk to us about this. But going back to the your experience with this virus, how are things in your hospital? What was sort of the dark point, and now that the admissions are starting to drop, are you getting a sense of relief, and do you have more breathing room? And I understand deaths are probably, from a date of admission to a death time is probably at least a couple of weeks, so that's why deaths haven't come down. But I'd love to learn more about your experience and how you've sort of dealt with this.
So yeah, I mean, our hospital is in a Bergen County of New Jersey, which is next door to Manhattan, and so we are as equally affected as Manhattan, and we have a tremendous amount of COVID-19 patient in our hospital. So to give you an example, my hospital is about 750 bed hospital. In order to accommodate the COVID patient, because they came, it is a very short period of the time. Like, when they started coming in the late February, early March, they were coming in dozens at a time in a few hour time. And hospital had to increase the capacity by 20%. So we had at some point we had over 1,000 beds. And to give you an example, we had a big cafeteria where people actually eat lunch after they buy the lunch in cafeteria.
Hmm.
This big hall was converted for the COVID-19 floor
Oh,
as
wow.
it's like a ward. And there were like 50 patients were admitted in that ward only. At the peak of admission, like a peak of the disease, my hospital is about 500 patients of COVID-19. So that is essentially 75% hospital was occupied with the COVID-19 patients. So
Right.
think about it, that COVID-19 told every disease that get out, this is my world. This is essentially happened. 75% hospital bed occupancy was COVID-19. And remember, this is an extremely infectious agent. So you have to separate those patients from the other patients who are admitted in the hospital, because other patients are very sick, and if they acquire COVID-19 into the hospital, their chances of death is very, very high. So essentially, we had a tremendous amount of influx of the COVID patients. And that was very taxing for certain specialty, including critical care, anesthesiology, respiratory therapy, because they had to do a lot of emergency intubation. And there are certain amount of physician in the hospital, and when you keep them working 24/7, they get exhausted at some point.
Right.
And there are many physicians got COVID-19, acquired COVID-19, because when they started intubating patient, which aerosolize the secretions, and they get affected. Originally, when all these things started, it was so high volume that the storage of the personal protection devices quickly ran out from the hospital.
Right.
Obviously, there is a supply chain. However, there is a lag in the supply chain when you have a huge amount of demand. And so there is a time period that they were using same mask for multiple days, and that also be sometimes very lethal, because you can acquire the infection very fast. So we have seen a very large amount of patients. We have seen lot of death in our hospital. As I said, that we have a little breather right now because the new admissions are steadily declining, and hopefully it will continue to decline despite of we opening up our states. So, and in the meantime, hopefully we would have something which can cure this virus. Then it would be very helpful.
So I have two questions. If we step back into the, as you were talking about the influx of these patients and going up to 75% of the hospital's occupancy was COVID patients. Were there any instances of the existing patients kind of getting angry or scared of this incoming virus? They're already vulnerable. And so, there's this now influx that they cannot do anything about, but they're going to get exposed. Well, obviously, there's the trust factor that the hospital is going to do its best to protect them and such. But maybe there was some bit of angst and anger in that. And then also the same thing for the other doctors or staff of your hospital. Did they have a say in, we don't want to take these patients, or we don't want to serve these patients? I'm guessing and hoping that that may not be the case, but were there any instances of you having to even pacify them in saying that, hey, we will get you the equipment that you need for your protection, or we will make sure that, in case you do have the exposure, we are going to take care of you?
So yeah, that is a real concern. I'm going to answer your first portion of the question regarding the patient's anxiousness being in the hospital, and there is a rapid influx of the patient coming in. Let me give you an example. This is almost a scenario that if you have a war and one country starts to bombard, and ultimately there is hundreds and thousands of patients, casualties comes down to the hospital. This is how the hospital was at that time. And at least I can speak about my hospital, is that they were very upfront about increasing the capacity very quickly. As I said, that they made new areas for COVID-19 patients. So these areas were inherently away from the other patients' area, because as I talked about cafeteria hall, which is near cafeteria, so it was nowhere near any patient's area, and they had like 50-bed unit for the COVID-19 patient. Also, what other thing they did, that they quickly called the construction companies and walled off the area which were open, because what happens you have to have a different kind of pressure in the rooms for the COVID-19. So they reversed the pressures into the systems in the hospital and walled off the area, so the virus doesn't escape from the COVID wards, and it automatically gets sucked out by the vacuum system. So they did those kind of things very well, and that was good enough for many of the patients to pacify them or their anxiety, that we are well taking care of them. However, you always gonna have a chance if you are admitted, because there is no way that you can 100% assure somebody, because if there is a one anesthesiologist who's intubating patient, if he goes to the COVID floor, he doesn't have a time to take a shower to go to another patient to attend him. So all he does that he takes off his personal protection device, puts on another personal protection device, and attends another patient. So in that kind of thing, you could definitely transmit the virus. The chances are low, but you can. So that's a patient anxiety part. The second portion is the doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists and other support staff who actually works in the hospital. To tell you the truth, this is what we are made of. This is what we do. I think, at least in my hospital, I can say we have a very good basic professionalism for the staff, and they were not shying away from their duties. And to tell you the truth, many of us actually volunteered to do the job, to see if people need us as doctors. Although I'm very specialized, and I usually don't treat respiratory illnesses, but we all volunteered to have a duty in a COVID staff, because at the end of the day, we are doctors and we can do the basic duties.
Mm.
No,
I think
we
that's a
don't.
sorry. Go.
Sorry. Yeah. So I know we don't do this enough. There is a little bit of appreciation coming in now, but thank you for your service. We really appreciate, and especially for you, to step out of your core specialty and go in and volunteer and be available. That's huge. That's amazing. Putting
Yeah.
yourself and your family at risk to do this. Thank you so much.
No, no, sure. No, that was a privilege. We all did our duties. I've seen a lot of patients, because ultimately we did discover that the COVID patient do develop cardiac complications. So
Right.
so I had to treat many patients for cardiac problems due to COVID-19. But it was a very humbling experience.
That's exactly the point I was getting to before, where I said, being a cardiologist, you're directly connected to this. But I think a lot of people don't realize the fact that, the key specialties for this disease are, pulmonologists or anesthesiologists who are intubating these patients. Um, they make up a very small fraction of the hospital. And generally they're treating, maybe, if you said you have over 700 beds in your hospital, generally they're supporting maybe 50 to 100 beds. But suddenly when this kind of thing happens, and now you have almost the full capacity that's taking up COVID-19, and those, that's a small fraction of professionals that are working at the hospital, servicing the entire hospital. That's a tremendous burden on them. And then all of the other specialties sort of volunteering and stepping in to help. I think that's, this is essentially the definition of a hero, right? So I second Nitin's sort of, praise, and say thank you for your service. Fantastic.
Yeah, no, sure. There is one of the case is there are limited amount of professionals. However, the other thing what helped is that all the elective procedures, surgery was canceled.
Right.
So all those anesthesiologists who may be regularly attending abdominal surgeries or heart surgeries or orthopedic surgeries or other surgeries or other procedures, they all got stopped.
Everything
The
stopped. Yeah.
hospital was essentially a COVID-19 hospital, basically.
Right.
So
Right.
everything else, the elective procedures, everything got stopped. And so that helped a little bit free up a few personnels. Um, but yeah, I mean, at some point, doctors also have an exhaustion point that, beyond that, you're not gonna be able to do a service to your patient
Right.
because you are so exhausted, and
Right.
and that kicks in at some point. But we never got to that point. What we were thinking about, the worst nightmare, that we had to refuse the patients that we are above the capacity.
Right.
So fortunately enough, we didn't get up to that point. We almost accepted every patient who came to our emergency room.
That's amazing. And I, the term flattening the curve sort of came
Yeah,
into our lexicon
that
because of
helped
this.
actually. Yeah, that
Yeah.
helped. Yeah,
And the whole idea of that was to essentially lengthen the time frame, sort of slow the peak,
right.
um, so that we can get to a vaccine or a treatment or something to that effect. Where do you think we are on that? Obviously, we don't have anything proven, anything FDA approved yet, uh, but lots of things in the works. Where do you think we are?
So that is a very good question. So the vaccine for any viral diseases are the first resort for most of the people because, as you know, the viral diseases are not easily treatable like antibiotics and bacterial diseases.
Right.
Antivirals are very, very rare medicines, and they don't most of the time treat the virus effectively, and that's why we have many viruses. We don't have a permanent cure like HIV. Where are we at the vaccine? So right now, currently in America, roughly 15 plus companies are working on a vaccine. So how do they make vaccine? I'm sure you know that they basically make an antibody which obstructs the protein which is essential for the virus to replicate. And that basically neutralizes the virus or decreases the virus capacity to replicate in the body. And this is how the vaccine works. The problem with vaccine in some of the viruses, another example is HIV, is that the virus mutates very fast and it changes the protein which require for replication, and therefore you cannot make the vaccine by changing protein each time. You have to make a specific vaccine against each protein, and that's why we failed to make a vaccine for certain viruses. Now, this is a very new virus. So it's a corona family virus, we know that. But it is a very new virus, and how fast it is going to mutate and how fast it is going to spread, a vaccine may be useful and may not be useful. As we said, that there are 15 companies are making vaccine. There is one company which we just heard the news called Moderna,
Hmm.
which is making a vaccine which showed some promising result. That means the positive amount of antibody in the patient's blood. Now, this antibody, if a patient develops and then if they get an infection, that antibody quickly neutralizes the virus and that can save the life. Now, usually, typically, when the vaccine develops, it takes about 3 to 4 years to develop vaccine because it has to go through the rigorous trials to, first of all, that you have to prove that it is effective against the agent. Number two is the most important thing, it is a safe for the patients because vaccine do have a lot of side effects, and some of the vaccine can have a dangerous side effects. So it has to be vetted properly. How it is vetted is that they do multiple clinical trials starting from the animal, and they slowly move to the human, phase one, phase two, phase three, phase four trials. And after the multiple trials, they basically determine that the number one, that it effectively um, avoids the disease or effectively treats the disease. And number two, it is very safe for the mass population, because once you develop the vaccine, potentially millions of people is going to get this vaccine. And if vaccine have a dangerous side effect, then it's a big problem. So FDA requires a very rigorous standards to approve the vaccine. Now, at this time, we are in this virus and we have unprecedented amount of deaths. So obviously, politically, um, people are pressuring to develop the vaccine faster. Now, the virus does not really follow the rule of politicians. Virus follows its own rules, and it takes its own time to develop the vaccine. And if in that development process, if it is rushed, you could potentially have a vaccine that you can later find out that it has a lot of side effects or it is not as effective. So it is remains to be seen that all these clinical trials which is being done right now, which is helpful in a timely fashion or not to develop a effective and a safe vaccine. So that's where the most of the murky water is. And current FDA is obviously under political pressure at this time. So it remains to be seen that how aggressive FDA will be in terms of vetting this vaccine properly.
Right.
You want to comment on certain individuals taking certain medication that is
Yeah, um, you know, there is a lot of talk about the medicine called hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, which some of our politicians decided to take. There is a mixed results about this medicine. The medicine has been around for probably 50, 60 years. So they are very old medicine. There is not, these are not new medicine. As being from India, we have used this medicine for malaria patients for a long time. And
Yep.
it is very effective for those patients. Now, they found out that this medicine somehow changes a pH of the lung, and therefore it makes it difficult for virus to attach to the lung cells. And that way, it may be preventative or it may be effective against this virus. So far, I've seen the data. There is a very mixed result. There are some studies have absolutely zero benefit. Some study showed there is some benefit. There are some studies show that if it is taken early enough in the disease, it may make the disease milder. But it is not recommended at this time. I haven't seen any agency or FDA or anybody saying that you should give this medicine for this. It has been given for the patients for COVID-19. Some of the people have, but all of these results are anecdotal results. You know, in medicine, we don't take anecdotal result or a gut feeling usually. We like to see clinical trials. Half the patient gets the medicine, half the patient gets placebo. And if the half the patient who gets the medicine has a benefit effect, then we usually believe those data. So
Right.
those kind of data does not exist right now. So whether people should take this medicine or not is just a flip of the coin. It may work or may not work.
Right.
there are guaranteed side effects to it, right?
So there are side effects. So some of this medicine can prolong certain intervals in the heart, and that can produce dangerous arrhythmia. However, the frequency of producing this dangerous arrhythmia is not that high as projected. Of course, when you give it to the news channels, they will inflate the truth. But because we have used this medicine long time for malaria, and they were malaria patients, they were not all dying with this heart problem.
Right.
So it is not as dangerous as projected, but obviously there is a danger to it. And if it doesn't work, there is no need to take this medicine. So why would you take an even small amount of danger if there is no effect of this medicine? So to take this medicine or not, it is right now sort of the physician's gut feeling or patient's belief and stuff like that at this moment. But we don't have a concrete data to support this medicine routinely for every patient.
Right. Right.
So I know we talked about a little bit on where are we going from here. Uh, Give us a little bit of a sense of what the second wave might look like.
Right. So that is a real concern, and I think Dr. Fauci correctly said into his speech that we flattened the curve by restricting people movement, people gathering. We made everybody wear mask and social distancing, and that's why we have a little bit flattened the curve. Not in New York, New Jersey, because we were too late, but I think in other states we did flatten the curve because they learned the lesson from New York and New Jersey. Now, the infectiousness of the virus does not decrease. There are certain things that this virus, once you contract this virus, for first 1 week, you may be completely asymptomatic. So when you're asymptomatic, you could, if you're asymptomatic, you're not going to go for the test because they only test symptomatic people. Like you have to have a fever, you have to have a cough, then you get a test. And even though many people didn't get the test because they just they didn't have enough tests available.
Right.
So, so in that first week, when you have no symptoms, you could be infecting other people. That's number one thing. Number two thing is that there are some people are completely asymptomatic with this disease, so they didn't even know that they had it. And now we are discovering many of the people who have an antibody present. That means that they had an infection, but they never had any symptoms. So those people were infecting everybody, going everywhere, and we didn't know about all these things. So so those population now, what is going to happen that now you're opening up, the COVID-19 hasn't gone yet. So so we have a flattened the curve, but now you're opening the people. So people, and it is a nice weather outside. It's a spring. It's just, at least in New York, New Jersey now it's 60, 70 degrees. So it is a very joyous moment for us. And people, see people running around and stuff like that. And they gonna, I don't see half the people wearing masks. So they're gonna start infecting other people whoever are asymptomatic, and some of them are recovered. So you can have a second wave when this, if that happened, that could be very deadly, because the most worry is the fall time period where the flu season starts. Because if the flu season starts and the COVID-19 comes down together, that could be very deadly for America.
Right. Yeah, I suppose if you have flu and then you get COVID-19, you're already at high risk. And now that just exacerbates the matter. So you end up with a much serious condition versus just getting the flu by itself. So,
Right.
yeah. Okay.
Have you had any discussions, with friends and colleagues about similarities or differences between 100 years ago when we had the Spanish flu, and there was a first wave, and then there was a second wave which was way more lethal. I believe it was what, 3 times as lethal as the first wave. And we are not done with the first wave yet in this case. Has there been any thought or discussion around it in terms of what, I mean, the magnanimity of the problem? Or do you think we've contained it to a place where the second wave may not be as bad as the Spanish flu?
So I have a few points to make on that one. So that's a very good question. Depends upon 100 years ago where we were, and 100 years after where we are right now. So the major thing is that the medicine has totally changed from 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, we didn't have ventilators, and we didn't, those people who acquired, they just pretty much died because there is no way to save them. So obviously, we do have much more medical advancement in 100 years. So that is one good thing. The other thing is also, contrary to 100 years ago, our population has increased a lot too. So the density of the population is much higher now. Mm-hmm. So contractual diseases can spread much more rapidly compared to 100 years ago. So that's also a truth. But what we are banking on is that if the second wave comes and the flu season strikes, we still have a few months to go for that. And in the meantime, we might have a little time to develop a potential cure for this virus. If that happens, it would be very, very beneficial. Many of us and our colleagues believe that probably we're going to find a potential cure earlier than the vaccine. Because vaccine takes its time to develop, and the potential cure, we have already tested few drugs. Remdesivir is one of the drug, although the results are not as promising as we would like to see in the medical community. But it has some data, and it has some promising values. There are other drugs in the trials currently being used as well. So the drug trial shows some promise, then we can impact the disease a little bit better.
Real quick, tell us what herd immunity is, and how far, even if that's an option for us, how far we might be from there.
Herd immunity is a concept where there is enough amount of population has an antibody against the virus. Then the transmission of the virus will decrease because many people already develop an antibody. How do you develop herd immunity? Is that if you so the another thing is the severity of the disease is also dependent upon how much viral load you got. So if you, like say, anesthesiologist intubating the patient and he is directly exposed to the secretions of the COVID-19 patient, that is among the highest amount of viral load you can get. Versus if you are walking down the street and somebody coughed and you didn't have an adequate distance, you have a good distance, but not adequate distance, you may get some virus in your inhalation, which is a small amount of viral load compared to the anesthesiologist. So if you get this very small amount of viral load, sometime body can get rid of the virus. But because virus entered in your system, body may have time to develop antibody against that virus because sort of that patient might have gotten a minor infection or that patient is naturally resistant to
Right.
COVID-19 and then develop the antibody. So if there is enough population infect everybody slowly, they can get immunized that way. This is essentially the same concept of developing vaccine, but
Correct.
vaccine has a dead virus compared to you're getting infection with the live virus.
Active live virus.
Usually, if when there is a 60 to 70% population develops antibody, that is called a herd immunity, and then the disease is process is dies down slowly because virus infects the subject, but the subject already have an antibody, so it quickly neutralizes. Now, not every virus is develops herd immunity. Like Ebola virus, it never developed herd immunity. So there are some viruses never develop the herd immunity. So again, if it works for this is so new that we don't know about this virus whether it is something that we can develop herd immunity or not. So it is still up in the air. And currently, I don't think we have 70% population infected. So I would say maybe 15 to 20%. So we are nowhere near to the herd immunity at this point.
Right. And to that point, if we're talking about 70% of the population infected with COVID, if we're considering a mortality rate of even 1%,
Yeah,
that's millions of deaths that we
yeah.
can expect
It's
before we
not
have
definitely
herd immunity,
1%.
right?
It's way higher than 1%.
Right. But I mean, for just US with a population of about 300 million people, if
Yeah.
you say 70% infected and, even 1% death, then that's, millions and millions of people dead. So for this particular disease, we really shouldn't count on herd immunity or hope that we ever get there, right?
Very true.
Very interesting. So we've been going for almost, 40 minutes, 45 minutes just talking about
That's what I
coronavirus.
was telling you because I
So
can
we
talk
never
for a
got
long
to the
time.
future of telehealth. But this was such an interesting conversation and, so much good knowledge that you shared with us that I think it was worth spending the time just discussing this topic. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up for this episode, but we will have to have you back to talk about the future of telehealth and talk about the robotic surgeries and having doctors seeing patients like this over Zoom or over other interfaces like that. So I think we'll have to schedule another day when you can come on. But I want to thank you again for coming on the show today and sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate it. Nitin, last thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much again for all you do and for saving lives and for putting yourself at risk, but not thinking about you, but thinking about the lives you're saving. And yes, we would love to have you back on and talk about telehealth and talk about other things that we as a team need to be aware of so we can do our bit to help us be safe and healthy.
Sure. No, thank you very much for having me. It was a very exciting time I spent with you guys. And as I told Dhaval that we can go on for a long time for this topic, so I'm sure we can come back together for telehealth and more interesting ideas.
That would be
Absolutely.
awesome.
That would
Yeah.
be fantastic. Yes, we love to talk. So
Yeah.
that's that's fantastic. All right, thank you very much, and everyone, please subscribe. Make sure you get content like this every time, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.